Right, we are recording. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Good to see you. It's been a while, I think. I don't know. By the time we get this uploaded, the news cycle is so quick for those who are actually still paying attention to it.
Yep.
That it might very well have been a while. So I'm here with James from the Commutation Construct podcast. You might recognize him. He's been on Kevin's Engineering Politics podcast a couple times. He was on the election night live stream. I mean, dude, I think you were there for probably, a solid 8 hours?
I think I left 10 minutes before I hit the 12-hour mark, actually.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, there you go. That tells you guys how, how coherent I was for most of that. Anyway, but so like I told James before I started recording, we had talked back and forth, I think, over the last couple weeks about what we were going to talk about. And James has some really interesting content on his podcast. He talks about language, some history stuff. He goes through speeches. It's a really kind of eclectic array of things that I like quite a bit. And I think the first time we talked about, kind of what we're going to talk about, we had went over a whole bunch of topics, man. I think we talked for probably close to 3 hours.
Yeah.
And I think, and throughout that, I was like, all right, you're going to have to take notes because I'm not going to remember this. You're going to have to take notes because I'm not going to remember this. And then before we just started, I told him straight up, I'm like, all right, just so you know, I'm coming in fairly blind because I don't really remember, kind of some of the stuff. I said, so as long as, you feel comfortable giving some primers, or we can talk about something completely different. We can talk about whether or not the Chiefs are going to, beat the Raiders tonight, in the rematch game. I think we will, but my predictions for these things have been a little bit off lately, so I'm not sure I trust that. But James said he was good. He had some notes and remembered some of the things. So there it is. That's the closest to an introduction that I can give. I'm not sure it was very satisfactory. Is there anything else you would add, James, to kind of introduce yourself to people who might not have otherwise be familiar with your stuff, although hopefully they will go and become familiar after this?
So my name is James Derian. I am the host of Commutation Construct on locals.com and on YouTube. So you can find me at both of those places. And I'll plug my other social media later towards the end. But It's good to be here. I like doing a lot of political philosophy and general philosophy types of videos and content. Try to help people. Well, I'm kind of just helping myself become educated and helping other people kind of learn with me is basically the idea. If you feel like my videos are slow, feel free to double speed them. So
I usually do 1.25 for all podcasts, including my own, when I go back to listen to see how it was. So 1.25 is like my default now. So
I'm a little odd. I listen to Ben Shapiro at 2x speed.
I listen to him at 1.5 because I'm not going to get into it, but a lot of times you can kind of predict what Ben's going to say about things, and so you have to pay. His is more of like, okay, I kind of want to get through it. Someone like Scott Adams, who talks a little slower, I listen to at 1.5 to make it manageable. But yeah, it just depends. So, all right, buddy. So what are we going to be talking about, man? At whatever speed people are listening.
At whatever speed everyone's listening to this at. Today, we're going to be talking a lot about the hero and villains narrative of the media and how they kind of set up almost every political and social situation as a battle of good versus evil, no matter which side you're on.
All right.
And I believe this really falls under almost your area of expertise, I would say, Truman, because you do a lot of tracking of the media, what they're where they're twisting things, twisting words, and how they're presenting things in a way that isn't necessarily in good faith or delivers in a way to entice more impassioned, like, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys type of an attitude among their listeners.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I have much of expertise on anything, to be honest, but I do track the stuff with the media. Now, what's interesting, so the heroes, is that something we had talked about, the heroes versus villains, whenever we talked previously?
We talked a little bit about it. It came up briefly. The heroes versus villain was basically a summation that I made while going over our conversation. We talked a lot about how we talked a bit about Matt Taibbi's the hate. Basically Hate Industries, Hate Incorporated, and how the media has been building up a system of hating the other side. So hero versus villain is kind of my summation way of describing it.
Sure.
I know I tend to kind of throw out these phrases, and you're just like, have we talked about that before? It's just how I sort things in my mind.
So yeah, well, what's interesting about that is, and, people who have listened to stuff, whatever I've talked about, Tidy's book, is that there's kind of two different phenomena within that framing, right? Because I agree with Matt that the way that occurred initially was more as like a business model kind of thing, right? So for those unfamiliar, kind of a quick summary of what he describes is that in the heyday of the news industry, that TV stations, especially we're primarily talking about television.
Yeah.
That the main news networks were kind of like beer, really. There was 3 different brands and they all tasted the same. And that the idea was, I give the beer metaphor, not him, but I like that because people get it.
Yeah.
And it follows the same thing with beer, in that what they thought was, okay, we're going to make it as bland as possible to appeal to as many people as possible. And 2 things kind of happened at the same time to cause that model to change. One of them was the end of the Cold War. And what people found in the news industry was that during the Cold War, people would always be checking in to, see, okay, where are we at in this conflict? We were all united against the Ruskies, right, against communism. And so they relied on the news media to tell them everything is all right, or maybe it's not all right, but, we're the good guys, we're going to win. The bad guys, the communists, they're going to lose. And I'm going to let you know kind of where we're at in terms of with this threat. And so they had established, I think, really accidentally, a business model that relied on fear, and it relied on that hero versus villain kind of thing you were describing.
Yeah.
And the other thing that occurred then the Cold War ended, right? So that kind of leaves them with a vacuum. And the other thing that's happening around that same time, which again, why I like the beer metaphor, is this is around the same time when we start seeing, kind of hints of microbrews, people going and finding different recipes and, playing around with different beers that don't, taste like, Budweiser or Busch Light or anything like that. That people realized that they could actually tailor entertainment to different demographics, and that was really profitable. So you see things like MTV, it's television, it's music television, and it's aimed at the younger generation. You have Lifetime, which is television for women, right? You have things like National Geographic, that's just one kind of thing. You have the Discovery Channel. You have all of these different BET, Black Entertainment Television, right? CMT, country music.
The specializations.
Television. Yeah, so you start to see people tailoring their content to meet a certain demographic. And so they're no longer trying to appeal to as many people as possible. What they're saying is, we have this group that we're marketing to, and that's what we're going to tailor all of our content around. And so the news media is in kind of a weird kind of flux where they're seeing, okay, well, with the Cold War gone, what are we going to talk about? And some of that, especially in the early 90s, was around, like crime. We were still in the middle of that crime epidemic that had been going on. And so that was kind of one thing that they could use, in terms of inner city crime, urban crime, all these other things. Violent crime was, spiking, or had been for a while. And so they're able to use that to some degree to still capitalize on the fear element in a way that was relevant. But they're also seeing these other industries that are succeeding financially by tailoring their content to certain demographics. And Taibbi talks about how Rupert Murdoch started Fox News I forgot what the quote was. I think I'm so gonna butcher this, but it was something like people that wear blue jeans vote too, or something. People that basically he was saying there is that wasn't it. They watched the news too. He recognized. You might want to look at the quote because I know I just screwed it up. But the point is that he recognized that there was this whole other group of people, conservatives, that watched in the news also, that they voted and that they wanted to stay informed. And he said they're not having their needs met by the current news media. And so he starts Fox News and starts to tailor their broadcasting to that specific group of people. Now, I would argue that what Taibbi kind of leaves out is that what is implied by that, which is that clearly if they did feel left out of the other news companies, that content was being tailored for people who aren't them. Something. And again, I think that probably it was subconscious in a lot of ways. And people start to establish patterns, in terms of this kind of story works well, this kind of story doesn't. And then people self-sort accordingly. Yeah. But regardless, well, let me finish this thought real fast. And then he says once Murdoch did that, the other companies started to catch on, and they started to do the same thing. And so you have this recognition that we had decades worth of news broadcasting where we established a pattern and an understanding that fear works, that anger works. He actually talks about one of the first radio broadcasters back in, I think it was the 50s. He wrote back then about how anger was what got him the most ratings on radio. But people understood that there was that fear model. Then once you start to tailor it the same way that country music television was tailored for a certain group, you start to tailor your news and just the information you're giving people to a certain group, and you combine that with that kind of that model that existed, whether intentional or not, of there's the adding a moral aspect, the heroes and villains thing. Then that makes for a pretty toxic mix whenever the heroes and the villains are, your fellow citizens. But that's kind of what happened there. And go ahead and say what you're going to say, or what your question was. Sorry. That was a long way.
Oh, no. It's fine. I was just going to mention how the way you said that Fox started tailoring the content. I've actually heard the argument before of people saying that, Fox was the one who started making everything really divisive. Because before that they were following the fairness doctrine, but that's also not necessarily the case, because there could already potentially be seen a white collar versus blue collar type of divide, or even an urban versus rural type of divide in the presentation of the news media, even before all of that necessarily happened. And that could be why Fox was able to take off in the way that it did.
Yeah, exactly. The idea that this is something, people do this with anyone on the right these days. They'll say that they are the ones who made something divisive if they respond in kind. Again, I would say Murdoch doing that, like the way the free market works is that if something succeeds, it's because you either innovated on something someone else already had and you're doing it better, or cheaper or whatever, or you're filling a need that existed. It's a vacuum that you identify a need and you go in to meet that need, and you do it well enough that it takes off and it works. And so I would argue, that was that divisive for Murdoch to do that? Potentially, sure, because, what could he have done? He could have said, all of this stuff is tailored to the left. It seems like there's all these other people left out. So I'm going to I'm going to come up with a really good model for a completely unbiased news network, right? He could have done that. And as the alternative, instead of saying, I'm going to just come up with the other side's version of this, I'm going to be better than both of what those would be and make a completely unbiased. So yeah, is it divisive in a way? Sure. But it, again, the sheer creation of it implies that there's already a divide, because he is filling a void for one side that clearly already existed on the other side. And I think that whenever you talk about urban versus rural, I mean, that's where we're at today. I can go on that for hours, but that was already happening. If you're, think about, we actually have analogs for this today, and we have for a long time. But if you are, living in a town of, 5,000, 10,000 people, and you're watching, so you have your local news station, but they also are syndicated through a larger news network, and you're seeing these programs about, this crime, crime in the cities and the violent crime on the rise and all these other things. You're looking around, and especially if it's, next to your local news, you're like, that's nothing close to what we're experiencing here. That's a whole nother planet that you're describing with that. Yep. And so it's like, and by the way, it also makes it not appealing to live in a city. So it's going to create a further divide even mentally. Like, okay, I don't want to hear about those guys are crazy. I don't want that. We have analogs for that with COVID stuff today, or with homelessness things. Whenever I posted this in response to something Bridget Fedesi said on her locals, I'm like, and this is something I've been on for a while now, is that whenever I hear what people are describing in some of these cities, I'm like, this is another planet. This is another country. I mean, I don't even know what you're talking about, because it's so foreign to my experience where I live that I really have very little of my personal experience that can relate to it. But I mean, but that is happening today with the COVID things, in terms of, whether it's lockdowns or homelessness or civil unrest or whatever, that urban versus rural divide very much still exists. But on the media thing, I want to kind of wrap up one thing that I was talking about a second ago. Whenever it comes to, you introduce that with Taibbi's book and stuff. I really think that whether it was intentional or not, whether it started economic or not, I think Taibbi, one thing he says in his book is, he says it started, or it was political, but also not. That it was there was a financial aspect that just kind of made sense. So I would say we have a confluence of again, that pre-existing model with the threats. The villains and the heroes. You have this understanding that tailoring your content is actually really profitable. And then also you have the internet coming along with clickbait, and people that are mainstream journalists now they have to compete with things like Gawker when it existed, BuzzFeed. What's the other one that gets all the celebrity crap? I'm drawing a blank on it, but they were big on, they would have like everything first. Like people would always have like the videos or the stuff of celebrity rants.
I think I know what you're talking about. Anyway, I don't know. I don't keep up with that type of news.
Right. But the point is that journalists who previously, the incentive was, I need to make sure I get my story right. I need to make sure I have my facts correct, at least ostensibly so. Now it was, I just need to be first, because I really like the metaphor that Eric Weinstein uses when he talks about the opening of immigration in the colleges in the 80s, and how the way that bringing in all these the immigrants into these programs to basically work for free in grad programs and PhD programs. He says, if you open a window on an airplane, it's going to affect everyone on the airplane. But it's going to affect the person sitting next to the window the most. And he says, and he uses the example of that in the academy, all of a sudden there was all this competition that it flooded the market so that people don't get paid what they should for being experts in some of these science fields. And so my point with that is that with the internet, that opened a window, and so the internet created competition, and we're still seeing how that's evolving in the ways that it's creating competition. So like Amazon, puts or Audible or all these things, basically puts Barnes and Nobles out of business. Those kinds of things. And Blockbuster gets put out by Redbox after Redbox starts to adapt. But the way that the information on the internet and the news sites on the internet, it really it did impact all industries, or at least most, I think probably all. But the way that it impacted the news industry, I think, is one of those ones that was sitting right next to the window, and it impacted them really heavily, because if you were the New York Times, you didn't used to have to compete with other people around you or anyone else in New York for, like, think about like what the white pages were, or the classifieds, or all those things. You were the place where people would advertise. You were the place where people would do these things, and so you had the luxury of, being a little picky and choosy about stories, and you could be careful to make sure you get your facts right. But whenever it became just about being first and you have clickbait, well, what's the model that we know worked? What'd you say? Heroes versus villains, right? They already had that model. They were already starting to lean into that a little bit. Think about 9/11 with, the radical Islam. That kind of gave us that for about 5 minutes, and so on and so forth. So I think that whatever the reasoning is, it created a situation now where it's just kind of embedded in the model of how we get our information, that it's not about what's true necessarily, but about who it's going to. And the way you keep them coming back is by keeping them afraid and keeping them pissed off. And, there are times in which I think that's fine. If you're fighting during World War II and you're going to the pictures to see the newsreels, it's good to feel unified, with those on the home front, or on the front lines, for the home front to be unified with the front lines in the fight against the Axis powers. But whenever you're tuning in every night to watch, Fox News or Rachel Maddow or CNN or whatever, and you're getting pissed off and being made to fear your neighbors, then that's a whole other issue. That's unsustainable.
Yeah. Yeah, because suddenly it takes the hero from being Americans to the hero is some subsection of Americans. So you can immediately see
the Americans being heroes isn't even necessarily the right answer, right? Like, it was about principles, because the Brits were heroes during World War II. The French were heroes, and so I think it really does kind of reduce it down to that low res group distinctions. Instead of anything, the heroics of the situation, or, the morality of the situation being rooted in objective principles. This also, again, I think there's so much of a confluence of different things here, and included in that is the steady but very discernible drift away from objective morality. And so whenever we have subjective morality being injected into this thing I just spent however long describing, then you make it to where both sides can actually make really good arguments for why the other side is evil, just based on the group that they're in, or the fact that they're not in your group. That in and of itself makes them evil, right? Because if you're the good guys and someone's not with you, well, they are kind of de facto the bad guys.
Those who are not with me are against me. That seems to be a pattern that's emerged. It's definitely it's an incredibly toxic one, especially when it's creating that system of others within one nation, and you can even see it within communities to some extent, where people aren't even willing to look at or talk to their neighbors because they have a different sign outside of their house. There are situations like that. So based on what you're saying, it sounds like a lot of it also comes from the consolidation of the power of the media, going from being an oligoptic like collection of superpowers into being divided into a completely mercantile is not the right word, but a fully I think the actual term is monopolistic market where basically everyone can compete equally to an extent.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't. The thing about what's really bizarre about all of this is, the example I use for the legacy media, because we have to make a distinction between the legacy media, which I think represents I have people that hate when I use that term because they think that it gives some kind of credibility to outlets like CNN or something that they shouldn't have. And
legacy just means old.
Right. I think that it is what we are brought, like, okay, if you look at what's remarkable is if you look at any movie where they're watching the news, right? It's usually some fake CNN thing. Like, I really am curious how many credits Jake Tapper, Anderson Cooper, and Wolf Blitzer have in movies, because CNN is the default kind of news thing that they use in the movies as the way that they're getting information. Well, what does that tell? Like, it's just the default position that this is a trusted place to get information or whatever. I think even as recently, the last one I saw was maybe the last Mission Impossible movie or the one before that. They got Wolf Blitzer and then someone's in a Wolf Blitzer mask or whatever, reading the news. But the point is that what I mean when I say legacy is that it's not just old, but it's established as what people think as like the default sources. And so what's really bizarre to me in this current milieu, and really kind of has been for a while, I mean, I understand it, but it is still perplexing, is they don't have credibility, and they do have all this competition. The metaphor I use is, and maybe you've heard me give this before, is Rose's family in the movie Titanic. There is a scene where her mom is, lacing up her corset because of the patriarchy or whatever, and she's explaining to her why Rose has to marry this one guy, because her dad had died, so her mom's husband, obviously, and she's like, all he left us was, our name and a bunch of debt. And so they were coasting on name alone. They were completely bankrupt. They appeared wealthy. People associated them with wealth and with prestige, but they really weren't. But what they were hoping would happen is Rose would marry that guy and then be marrying into his legitimate fortune, which would basically backfill the place of, make their reputation align with the reality of the situation. Because at that time, the reputation was not in line with reality. They were actually broke, right? They were bankrupt. But it would backfill that and rectify the difference there. And what we have is a legacy media, places like CNN, NPR, NBC, ABC, New York Times, the Washington Post, that I think are like that, where they're operating on name alone, because like it kind of makes it, as much as it sucks, it makes sense for the movies to use someone like Anderson Cooper or Wolf Blitzer, to
someone more well known and established.
Right, because like it would be super weird if it was like the Daily Wire or something like that, right? Or if it was Huffington Post. Or the Young Turks. Like, it wouldn't make sense, even though it would be basically the same thing. And so they're running on name alone in terms of being perceived as legitimate. But I think what's happened is that and this is the part that's kind of confusing, but sucks, but because I think I get it, is because you look at these groups and you're like, why are they still considered legitimate? Like, they're clearly not legitimate. But I think they married into a family that has been granting them legitimacy, and that is big tech. That's why both YouTube and Twitter will, platform and promote all of these other legacy news sites before they'll do that with, anything else. And so it backfills and makes them, continue to be perceived as legitimate, and they're making money in the process of doing so. They haven't been forced to adapt in a good way to their competition. They get to, continue to kind of race to the bottom with each other in terms of being first rather than being right, and just being first with their side.
And they're being spoon-fed.
And we're being spoon-fed it by the tech companies that they've married into that have been granting them that legitimacy. So whenever you're talking about the monopoly, it's a fake, it's a false monopoly, because there are alternatives. We're just, what I'm seeing is maybe what you might call, and you can tell me what you think about this, just establishment creep.
Yeah.
Is that the legacy media is the establishment, and the internet was a space for a while that was just, the Wild West, in a lot of ways. And I think in a lot of ways that were good, and also in ways that were not so good. And the establishment crept in and found, it took them a while to kind of understand it. I think they still don't, but they understand the parts they need to understand in terms of, okay, how do we maintain our establishment legitimacy kind of in this new frontier? Whereas, previously in other eras, it might have been, the establishment, whatever that looks like, arriving in some frontier town and saying, okay, this is how it's going to be now. You did things your way. Now the big dogs are here to run the show. The digital realm is the new frontier, and the establishment is finally, rolled up in their posse and saying, okay, the big dogs are here, and we're going to tell you what's what. And I think that's what's happened.
Yeah, well, they're still big enough to throw their weight around and knock the other guys out of the ring. They're trying to do that, basically coming in at the last minute to save their own skin. That's a very interesting thought concept. I like that establishment creep. It reminds me of what I've heard about the early days of radio, how it was a lot more free, and then over time, all these regulations came in, and it sort of empowered the establishment networks there. And then again with TV media, things like censorship of what you can and can't say on TV. I believe, didn't George Carlin get arrested for doing his 7 things you can't say on TV skit or something like that?
That feels like a question I should know the answer to, but I
yeah, I should have the answer, but I've heard that he got arrested for something like that. So so you've got that, and then so you had all of that type of restrictions put on that kind of helped to embolden the more boring establishment stuff that already had the weight to throw around. It keeps them from falling down. So there seems to be a bit of a government/moneyed interest in this. There's the establishment able to kind of sway the tide of what's happening. That's why there's a lot of fear about the 230 reform, because it's going to basically make it impossible for something like a Parler or a BitChute or any kind of non-major social media entity to compete with the big ones, because they're going to be subject to the same regulations that these big ones are going to be subject to.
Yep. It's regulatory capture, but just in a different realm.
Exactly.
We see EPA, we see this in all types of other industries, where whenever someone in a big company is excited or, not, at least sanguine about being regulated, that tells you that they're going to benefit from that. I mean, that's what happened with
exactly.
What was Glass-Steagall, I think is what it was after the 2008 crisis, and people talk about how Glass-Steagall, and I'm pretty sure I'm talking about the right piece of legislation here. How would keep the banks from doing what they did again, when the other thing that it did was make it incredibly difficult for small banks to compete. The number of small banks after Glass-Steagall, I'm pretty sure, you might want to check this, shrunk considerably because they couldn't stay in business. What's funny is, back to the beer metaphor, whenever Prohibition happened, when the Volstead Act was passed, a lot of towns had their own breweries. The number of breweries in the country at the time. So when I bartended, my boss told me this. So I don't know if this is true, but he was a mountain of interesting factoids like this. So I think he probably was correct here. What he said was that prior to the Volstead Act, there were more breweries in the country than there are now. But so many of them shut down because they didn't have a thing to basically switch their operation to. So the places that were able to stay in business were the ones that were big enough to switch their manufacturing to something else. And those are the ones that whenever it was repealed, were able to immediately turn around and switch back to making beer again. And that's where you get those big companies that, we had the same beer for, basically 50 years, was because they were the only ones who were able to, turn around what their production was. And so it's kind of the same kind of thing where you have a monopoly of sorts that's created by these bigger companies, whether it's intentional or not. It just kind of is what it is. I mean, that's what do they call it? The Matthew principle. Peterson kind of coined that from, I think it's Jordan Peterson who coined it, but he talks about it where there's the parable where Jesus says, to him who has much more will be given, and to him who has little, it will be taken away.
So I've heard that
idea of that if you have a lot, it's just easier to get more. And if you don't have very much, it's easier to lose all of it, and actually much more difficult to go in and compete. And the media has done that. Now, I think that a lot of this also is, I'm just thinking out loud right now, so you can interrupt at any point with something maybe more coherent or substantive for people might want to watch. But I think much like the way their model changed at the beginning was largely rooted in just kind of market decisions and what's profitable and what made sense at the time. I think that's probably what happened with, places like Twitter and YouTube, Google, getting into bed with these big companies and, deciding to promote them. And they don't, someone like Steven Crowder will have videos demonetized or taken down because, or PragerU, because they'll say you violate, the terms of service where you talk about war or something. But CNN can have all these videos, talking about war all day long. And
they're they're not only just fine, they're promoted.
Right, exactly. And so I think that was probably a financial, thing at the beginning. And it made sense because, YouTube, someone like YouTube or Twitter, they're like, okay, well, if people are going to be searching for news, what are the credible news sources? Well, I guess it's these guys. The same reason why Hollywood does that with, why they have Wolf Blitzer, doing that. I'm going to check and see how many credits those guys have, because I think that's an interesting question, because it makes sense. And so the point is they're being kept afloat and being legitimized for reasons that have nothing to do with the quality of the service that they're providing, is kind of my point. And so that it's an artificial monopoly because they're not actually providing a gooder service. It's the opposite. They're doing harm. They're not informing people. They're not telling the truth, or they're providing the truth in such a skewed or disjointed or fractured, not whole kind of way where it's, we're only giving you this one kind of snippet here so that it's kind of true, but it's also not contextual. So, it's one of those things that might be technically true, but not accurate. But they get to do that even though what people are looking for is the opposite. Now, maybe that's changing, but because of they're being propped up, not because they're actually doing anything good.
Yeah, and there's also this aspect of codependence that seems to be going on, especially between the media and big tech, because in regards to platforms like Twitter, in regards to somewhere like Twitter, a large portion of their blue check marks are media people, medialites. Yep. There's so much. Also, a ton of people who get out of politics or retire from working at any kind of administrative offices within the government take up media jobs. So there's that influence of sort of the government's special interest coming in and then trying to influence people to sort of support the things that they were doing in government and the things that they further want to see in it. Let me stop.
Hold on. That only happens on one side that I know of. I don't think that you see a lot of Republican like retired Republicans, public officials going into the media.
You see it a bit with Fox.
I'm sure, but I'm saying in the same way that you see like staffers from all these different campaigns, Kamala Harris's campaign, Elizabeth Warren campaign, Bernie Sanders campaign, Joe Biden's campaign, Hillary Clinton's campaign.
I mean, Andrew Yang works for CNN now.
Campaign. Yeah, going to work for Google, Alphabet Inc., Twitter, or some fact-checking group or something like that, or CNN, or NBC or anything like that. Like, it seems like there is a bit of an asymmetry between what side does that, and it speaks to probably the asymmetry that existed in the 90s that Rupert Murdoch identified and just tried to fill the void on the other side.
Yeah, though I think to an extent they just go into different places. I think the Republicans probably go into more big business, banking type of stuff.
Totally, yeah.
And whereas the Democrats tend to go more towards the social influence types of positions,
which is smart on their part, by the way. I think that is one of the reasons why they've been so successful.
Yeah,
in creating basically a leftist establishment monoculture. Via Hollywood and the news media and increasingly tech, is because they understood where the influence is in terms of getting things done. And so I think that there's something to be said for that strategy. Now, I would rather us live in a place where that is irrelevant. Like, in other words, that let me think about that actually, because what I was starting to say is something that I don't think actually applies. So maybe what I would alter it is, I would rather us be in a place where either people are so principled that those don't work, like basically the attempts to manipulate through those tactics don't work, or it's offset by a countervailing force on the other side in the same arena, I guess. So so in this context, we're talking about information.
Yeah.
And so, but I would rather the first one, that people are so principled that they reject any attempts for someone to try and, I give the metaphor of if, someone strikes up a conversation with me and starts talking about how great this product is that they have, and, why I should have that product and how amazing it is and how much they love it, it makes their life better or whatever. How I basically process that conversation is going to depend a lot on whether or not I know the fact that they're a salesman for that item. If they're a salesman and I don't know it, and I go and get that, and then I later find out they're a salesman for it, then it's like, well, what the heck, man? I thought, I didn't realize you were benefiting from this. Now you could make an argument that it might not matter, because if what they're saying is true, the fact that they're biased, doesn't, isn't necessarily relevant, or the fact they benefit isn't necessarily relevant. But that's the information you should have. You should know what your bias is.
The transparency of it.
Yeah, exactly. If I know that they're a salesman for that product, then I'm going to calibrate accordingly. And we just don't have that with these media industries. Is that people don't know how to calibrate what they're doing. I've said it 100,000 times that I really don't typically criticize Fox or MSNBC from an information standpoint. I'm starting to from a cultural impact standpoint, because they're pretty open about what their biases are. So on that, they get good marks from me on that, because it's like people know what they're getting into with these things. Now I'm starting to criticize them more because what they're doing is really, really caustic for the social fabric, regardless of how open they are about their biases. But that's a whole other thing. But we have these other industries or these other groups that aren't open about that.
And again, that does reflect back to the hero versus villain narrative that we kind of started this on, that they end up making, the way I see it is their world basically revolves around each of them. So the journalists end up kind of making this own kind of like inner circle. So when they basically just divide out between like Fox News and quote unquote conservative media, which they don't even talk about anyone other than Fox News, first of all.
Yeah. No, that's not true. They talk about InfoWars and Breitbart.
Okay, but they use them as their like total extremist examples, which
it's the alt-right or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like InfoWars, sure, they like to do conspiracy stuff, but I mean, it's kind of crazy because when you look at it, Fox is at best like inner city Republican, which is definitely not the same as any kind of rural type of Republican conservative values.
I'm gonna have to trust you on that because I don't know enough about any of what you just mentioned. Like, I don't have much engagement with Fox. I don't have a history with Fox. I mean, one of my Facebook profile pictures, I think back in the mid 2000s when I was in college, I thought it was hilarious. It was a picture of like a plane dropping bombs, and it was Fox FAUX news, fairly unbalanced because they had that, of course, ridiculous.
Fair and balanced.
And balanced. I said fairly unbalanced. So I've always only ridiculed Fox, and that was at the point in time whenever I thought that these other things were good. Now I just ridicule all of them. I just basically treat everything the same way I used to just treat Fox. So I don't really know enough about. So maybe flesh out a little bit what you were just talking about in terms of rural Republicans or inner city Republicans and what that distinction is.
So I don't. I see the Republicans on Fox typically being. While they tend to be bombastic and very much, in general, a lot of them are very forthright about their opinions. They tend to be socially, they're not all that conservative. They're like very tepidly conservative, I would say. Fiscally, it's hard to even say if they're conservative. Like for all anyone knows, they're operating within what almost they practically had a monopoly on conservative media for a time. So it's hard to say where they are really fiscally, if you would consider them conservative, because it seems like they promote more regulation in a lot of areas too, which tend, as we were talking about before, it tends to sort of hamper these new growing companies and independent sources, both for media, technology, and any kind of industry. That kind of regulation can really hamper competition. So is that really conservative when you're trying to get rid of the competition through things like that? So it's hard to really say. I know that most Fox hosts, they're from inner cities. That's where they grew up. That's sort of the ideal. That's kind of like the air they
inner city. Do you just mean like urban?
Urban.
A city? Because inner city is often
pretty much. Okay. Yeah. I mean in a city, not right. Inner city.
Okay.
Slight right. Correction there.
Now I'm starting to understand more. I'm like, okay, he's talking about people on the east side of Chicago.
No. Okay. News. Okay, that's fair. No, I'm talking about. Think of the basically whatever you would consider like a New York City Republican, or maybe like a San Francisco Republican, or I mean,
non-existent misnomer is what I would call that. Oxymoron.
Exactly, which is why I've always felt like Fox News, while it claims to be like this bastion of conservative news, it really isn't, because it has that it has that more liberal influence, whatever you want to call the left, influence that really doesn't exist in more rural America.
Well, I mean,
not from what I've seen, at least. Not on their TV shows. Now, they do have some strong, impassioned religious hosts sometimes, but for the most part, they tend to be more tepid on that. Sometimes they'll bring on libertarians who are more about being more libertarian. They're not going to be socially that conservative typically. So it's for me, seeing a company like Fox as like the holy grail of what a conservative should be. At best, it's establishment moneyed conservative.
Yeah. So this is, I'm actually planning on doing an episode that goes into more, fleshes out more what I'm about to say, which is that that's not just a Fox phenomena. That's kind of a media phenomenon right now, and especially like online. Ben Shapiro doesn't talk to rural people. Michael Knowles doesn't. Andrew Klavan doesn't.
Yep.
Although I think he probably understands them a little more. Matt Walsh, Tucker Carlson, like all the, and I, by the way, I know people in Middle America that share Tucker Carlson videos and stuff like that, or Ben Shapiro videos. But that's a media thing. We have one of the things that I'm going to talk about in the next video I'm going to do is how, here is everywhere and everywhere is here, in a symmetrical way, because people in rural areas are having all of their news filtered through the lens of someone who lives in like Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, or New York.
And that's exactly my point.
Yeah, but I'm saying it's not just a Fox News thing.
No.
Everyone in all parts of the country are having their information filtered through one of these, like whatever the situations are and your respective ideology based on that situation in one of these hive mind cities.
Yeah.
That are all similar and have experiences that, like I mentioned earlier with the, when you talked about urban versus rural people in the 90s, it's kind of always been different. But you at least had localism and local news to help you out more. And people were, because of the internet, like I said, that's one of the windows that got opened is the news content, the media content, and the stream of information has been flattened out to where here is everywhere and everywhere is here.
Yeah.
And by everywhere, I mean these cities, but everywhere is being given the perspective of someone either on the right, left, or in between in these cities. So no one is speaking to someone who's in a rural area, except for maybe someone who's broadcasting locally on an AM station in that area. Now, we used to have people that understood the perspectives of people there. This is another thing Tybee talks about. And then maybe we could get back to discussing the moral elements here and the implications of it. But he talks about how, journalists used to be a blue collar working class thing. It was people that weren't wealthy. They didn't come from wealth. Maybe their dad was a plumber or something like that. And so people that were in journalism used to understand regular people in a way that they don't anymore, that journalists have absolutely become
an elite class.
Yeah. And so that's where, that kind of establishment creep has happened, there as well, even prior to the online stuff, but it's only getting worse every year, that people who are doing journalism largely don't understand most Americans. And so we have this weird kind of
dichotomy.
Well, dichotomy, and also just coalescence of elite or establishment mentality, across all of these realms. So whether it's tech now is the newest iteration, but it kind of came from politics and the news media, and in sports even, that it's the establishment and elite kind of mindset being projected onto everyone else. And because the way social media works and because the way the internet works, people kind of buy into that. If you're a 16-year-old who's on Twitter or Facebook and you and your friends are just in this never-ending now stream of information that's coming from people who have this mindset, it might be completely irrational for you to map that perspective onto your reality and your actual day-to-day circumstances. But you spend so much time in that space that is what is real for you, and you just try to fit that onto your circumstances, even if it is completely irrational, even if it doesn't make sense on any factual level. That's what ends up happening. So I don't know if that makes sense, what I just kind of said there.
No, it does, because there is that There is that part where it's like people are trying to take what they can get at this point. And part of what I was talking about before is because the divide is within the elites, and it tends to make the more average American viewpoints, both on left and right, actually, to be fair about this. I was just bringing up Fox because Fox is seen as like the only major really establishment conservative media. Daily Wire is rising, but still, I would say Fox is like the go-to, and maybe a few papers like the Wall Street Journal, stuff like that. But because it's so concentrated among these these city elites, the ivory tower elites, it kind of skews the perspective, and it tends to be that from what I've seen, that is less representative of American right than I would say it is of American left. I would.
That's a fair point. I think that's like it ends up with the same kind of outcome, but it's still an important distinction to make, I think. Exactly.
So I do feel like there's more of a distinction between the rural right than the rural left with how the media is, but also because Fox is basically this bastion of what is conservatism, or even evil conservatism, from the other side with this hero-villain narrative. If Fox is seen as really hard right-wing, then when Fox is actually just this ivory tower elite city elite quote-unquote conservative view, which even then it's arguably not even really that conservative other than a few of their talking heads.
Yeah, you need to make a distinction between conservatism and the right.
Exactly.
But I understand what you mean, yeah.
Yeah, so it ends up making the ones who are more the rural right, the rural conservatives, or the people who like American tradition and have lived it out in their non-urban areas for generations on. And they have that, there's a cultural difference there, and it ends up making those people look that much more extreme.
Yep.
By comparison. So
yeah, because they're considered even more extreme than the thing that you're saying is fairly normal. Yeah, I'm tracking with what you're saying.
Exactly. So they think Fox is normal, but they think Fox is already an extreme. So when Fox is already not extreme in the way they think they're prescribing it, it makes the people the more normal people who lean in that direction seem that much more extreme.
Yep. Even though it's probably the roles are reversed a little bit, right? So it's actually more likely that a conservative living in, the middle of North Dakota or something is probably a lot more of just a normal person and less likely to lean into extreme dichotomies and inflamed rhetoric than someone on Fox is. Because if you're on Fox, or, in a lot of these, I've heard multiple people who are friends with Ben Shapiro, who are on the other side, ideologically, talk about, really make the distinction that they'll say, seriously, I think I've probably heard 3 or 4 people say this, that he is way more reasonable in person than he is on his show. And they'll say his show is mostly red meat and he has to do these things because of who his viewership is, but that he's a lot more muted in person. And I've heard multiple people on the left say this, everyone from Joe Rogan to Eric Weinstein to Brett and Heather Weinstein, Pete Boghossian, those kinds of things. And so there are a lot of people that respect him on the left because they say he's more reasonable in person. My point is that it shouldn't be that way. And so that, you should just be who you are in whatever it is that you're doing. And if someone's looking for someone to feed you red meat, then they can go down to the butcher shop, but we're here for information. But my point is that whenever I said they're quite the opposite, is that the rhetoric you hear on Fox or in some of these right-wing outlets is it has to be more inflamed. It has to be because they've told themselves that that's what it has to be, the same way MSNBC is inflamed. And so it's actually, you're more likely to run into someone with, more moderate positions or who's going to apply a more nuanced perspective of things in those areas that people are assuming with far more extremism because of the way they see Fox as being normal or something, or normal in terms of just this is what the right is like, when really I think most people, and I think it's probably the same with a lot on the left too, where you're not going to get as, again, I think it's probably more like that because of how pervasive that ideology is. It's just ubiquitous in everything. But you're going to get more nuance. Basically, I'm saying if someone's being paid to give their perspectives, you're not going to get as much nuance from them as someone who aligns with them ideologically, but is just a normal person.
Yeah, that sounds pretty fair. So the reason I say what I did is because I remember watching some clips from what's Charlie Kirk's organization called again?
Turning Point USA.
Turning Point USA, that's it. I remember they were going to some more rural colleges at one point giving talks, and they were talking about appealing to diversity and not necessarily like Christian values and stuff like this. And people in the audience lost it on them. And I feel like there is that same attitude comes from a lot of media where it's like, we don't really talk about the social issues anymore. Here's what we focus on. And I feel like when you get to more of the rural areas or even suburban America, you will see more people focused on the social, on the moral issues that come to mind for them.
Yeah, no, that's right. I don't think I really have anything else to add to that, but that is correct. But I think largely because they can afford to. What I mean is that if you're in a town that's largely a monoculture, whether racially or from a religious standpoint or whatever, it's going to be a lot more in your interest, or at least you'll perceive it as being in your interest, to kind of maintain some kind of status quo and not talk about, and just to kind of see some of those social issues as a threat. Now, what someone who was listening might have just heard me say is that people in small towns are backwoods, redneck, who don't want different ideas coming in. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that it's the same. So Thomas Sowell talks about how there were companies, let's say you were a construction company in New York, 100 years ago or something, or even before that, and you have, let's say 150 years ago, and for whatever reason you wound up with a lot of Irish Catholics on your crew. You might not have anything against Protestants, but that if you hire Protestants with those Irish Catholics there, or vice versa, or whatever, you have mostly Protestants, if you hire some Irish Catholics, you're inviting conflict. So you might be wrong, but you're going to have something that kind of feeds that. So you might just avoid hiring Protestants if your crew is mostly Catholic, just to not have to worry about it. And so my point is that people rightly understand that whenever you have different ideologies and different cultures and different viewpoints, it's not that it necessarily is going to be conflict. Ideally, again, and going back to this idea of principle, if you have a principled and a virtuous population, it won't be, to the degree in which virtue and morality aren't part of the conflict. But whenever you don't have, some people rooted in virtues and morality, they're less likely to see the reasoning for entertaining ideas like othering other perspectives, right? So if your school is mostly white, you're probably not going to give a lot of credence to, we need to provide these different perspectives to these different issues. Whereas if you have a school that's, let's say, 20% white, 20% Asian, 20% Hispanic, 20% African American, 20%, Middle Eastern or something, you're going to understand the need for addressing those things, or at least factoring it into the math that you do, just from a practical standpoint, more than someone who isn't in that situation. So that's what I mean. And so I come from a very small rural town. I graduated 43 people. So I'm not crapping on that. I'm just saying that people who are in, going to that, the distinctions between the big cities and the rural areas, people that are in those rural areas don't have those same issues come up. And so they're not going to see the need to address them as much as someone who is in an area that does have those issues, that they will see the need to address it. Now, the fact that Charlie Kirk would try to go to a town, I don't know any of the examples you talked about there, and maybe try to speak to the audience there as if he was speaking to UC Berkeley is stupid. So he kind of gets what he gets there for not, for saying, like I said, not making any distinction between who he's talking to. And by the way, I think it's incumbent on them to make the case to people in those areas for them to, because if they're looking around going, why, how is this relevant to us? I would argue it's incredibly relevant, because it's going to be shoved down your throat either way through educational curriculum, or like I said, everywhere is here and here is everywhere. Your kids are going to be on social media or whatever getting this anyway. So, you need to take it seriously. But it's probably incumbent on Kirk and them to make that argument. And just, I think conservatives or anyone who's paying attention, like a James Lindsay type, more generally, is trying to make that case that people need to be paying attention to these issues, because you're not going to be able to escape it. But that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
In terms of, we basically spent the last hour just kind of talking about what things we're seeing. But at least from a more sanitized, how did we get here kind of thing. And I think laying out some good definitions, but
I think it's good for delivering context.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. And so, kind of back to the
heroes and villains.
Yeah. The topic at hand, if you will, with heroes and villains, whenever you think about that phrase, again, regardless of how we got here, it's where we are, right? It doesn't do you much good to, if your boat is sinking and you wind up in a lifeboat and you're, in that situation, it's certainly nice to be reflective and think about, how did I wind up here? But at the end of the day, you got to address the fact that you're in that situation. And then you can, especially if it's more of a life or death thing, I'm not painting this as that, although it does have some serious, dire implications. My point is that however we got here, it's where we are, and we have to deal with it, and we have to address it. So as you think about this idea, how do you see this playing out practically, not just in terms of the way content is delivered or the way it's tailored, but the impact that it has had, that it's been having, and the trajectory of that, or anything. Does that make sense? So yeah. We've really only addressed the one side of it, which is what the media is doing, has been doing, why it's been doing that, how it's operating, how it's staying afloat, so on. But we haven't addressed the other side of it, which is, okay, so they've been doing this thing. Why are we talking about it? Well, it's not because they're doing it. We're talking about it because the impact it's had, or at least our perception of the impact. So how do you kind of map that out in your own mind?
So it seems to be emboldening a lot of a cultural division, for sure. I'll go back and focus on this. So by having this hero and villains narrative, especially with it being sort of I call Fox CNN light, because I feel like everything they do is just taking taking CNN lines and then rephrasing them in ways that appeal to conservatives a lot of the time, at least for their news segments when it's their key demographic of not anchors, their whatever they call like Tucker Hannity and them. They're a little different, but when it comes to their news coverage, it's definitely like CNN light, just kind of rephrased. I mean, I literally watched them on, and I brought this up a couple times, but it's relevant to bring it up here once again. I literally saw them record an exploding trash can on live camera, and the first sentence out of the reporter's mouth who was there was, they just blew that up with a firework. I'm pretty sure that was a firework. He wasn't facing the explosion. He didn't see anything that was going on. Like you saw on camera, a guy run up, put something under the trash can, and then it blew up. And he's like, and he just, yeah, and he just
a really big and powerful one.
Yeah, he said, and repeatedly they said that wasn't a bomb, that wasn't a bomb, that wasn't a bomb. And I'm just like, fireworks are bombs, technically.
Yeah, fireworks are bombs.
Yes, they're just pretty bombs, first of all. And then they go through that whole segment, and then Martha, who's one of their news anchors, goes and says, we will be back later covering the slightly explosive protests.
Sweet.
Just like, it's like, is this your fiery but peaceful? So that's that. I already had a bad opinion of Fox before that, but when I heard that line, that was when I gave up. That was when I basically stopped listening to their news segments. That's why I don't have any newer one-liners for them. But hearing that kind of that shocked me in a way, because they started making claims of fact without any evidence to support it. The evidence was an explosion went off on screen. And now they're making these claims that definitely wasn't a bomb. That was just a firework. They're making all these weird statements telling us what happened when everyone could literally just see what happened. And they were reframing it in this very tepid, like it's a peaceful protest type of way. And it did not make much sense to me. It's way too deviating from what I see as the norm. So I see a lot of conservatives running away from Fox. Since then, I've been seeing more, and especially since the election, there's been more and more running away from Fox. And there's already the malignment from more left-wing sources that Fox is the right-wing devil. Mm-hmm. So considering that, looking at the future, looking at the cultural division that this is causing, there's already a bit of divide that I see on the right between what you could consider new right and old right. And I'm not even going to get into the establishment right, which is like the Lincoln Project conservatives, air quotes. But you have this. So there's growing factions, and the factions are all starting to hate each other more and more. It's like
hold on. Let's take a step back. So, I mean, you can continue to go down this path. This is fine. This is worth talking about. But yeah, it's not like the only implications of the general media's business model is with Fox and their viewers.
No. I'm just using them as an example.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. I am just using them as an example.
Sure that I clarified my question. Because I'm talking about all of society.
No. So I'm referring to all of society. I'm just using Fox as kind of my step one example, because I think it's the one that our audiences probably know the best.
Maybe.
Possibly.
I don't watch it, so maybe yours. I don't know what my
maybe mine. I feel like my audience is. I feel like my audience is more conservative, so of the mainstream medias are probably more likely to watch that. So that's kind of why I'm using them as my baseline for this. So on the right side, I'm seeing a lot of these internal divisions and growing animosities. On the left and maybe you can verify this more. I don't know that there's too many inter-competition or combating on the left side as much, other than like, I know Cenk and the Young Turks, and that part of the left argues with the establishment left a lot. And so there is some combating there, but especially the division between right and left is growing farther apart. So from my perspective, it definitely seems like there is we are in a divisive cultural period. I can tie this back to multiculturalism too, which seems to be an issue because it prevents people from unifying. When you have a certain type of multiculturalism, there's a way in which you can have multiculturalism, which brings people together of all different ideas, and they begin to sort of merge their ideas and create something new. Kind of like, you've got the Texican food, you've got like the American Chinese food. It's not really Chinese, but it's like Americanized versions of these things. But now we're in a period where on the left, you see a lot of more of an emphasis on diversity just for diversity's sake. And it ends up becoming divisity is what I'm going to say for it. Instead of just being a multitude of viewpoints for one goal, it ends up being a multitude of viewpoints that aren't even allowed to cross over. And then when they have all that, and then they're looking at the right, and the right is beginning to fracture apart itself. And there's I think the right has a bit more unity because they're like, okay, here are some core key aspects that will intermingle on, and being American is basically the highlight of it. Whereas on the left, I see more of it being about being whatever part of whatever group you fit into, as opposed to just everyone being American. So considering that, I see the divide growing. I see the way people are starting to want to sort of corner other people off and give everyone their own little segments. It definitely feels like a divided states of America type of scenario where as long as the media keeps feeding the beast, as long as the temperature keeps going up, it's like a thermostat with no limit. And the media can feed into that narrative over and over again, and they can use these, they can use their connections with the tech companies, their kind of codependence to really, they can use that codependence to institutionalize what their arguments are, even on both sides. Like if you go on Gab, they're going to be like, well, may not using Fox, but they might be using Breitbart as like something that they're using to promote their beliefs and ideas. So it seems that all of these areas are getting their sort of all the social medias are getting their establishment media connections in some way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely sides picking at this point, is the way I would look at it.
Yeah. So two things to what you just said there. Which one do I want to do first? I'll do the first one. I'll do the first one first. Whenever you said thermostat with no limit, no way do I agree with that. And what I mean is that what we're seeing is unsustainable. It absolutely has a limit. I think the mistake that these companies make is assuming that there's no limit, that if we keep doing this, it's perfectly sustainable. It'll be fine. There's clearly a dissonance, I think, broadly right now. And I think this goes back to the way that we use the internet as our filtration device for understanding things instead of our practical circumstances, where there's clearly dissonance between cause and effect, and like my actions, decisions, ideas have consequences that are real, practical, measurable, observable. I go back to the idea that Portland reelected Ted Wheeler, that Lori Lightfoot is still the mayor of Chicago. Something that I think we talked about in terms of failures of localism and what I perceive as them. The people aren't making a conscious connection between their actions and their consequences. And I think that exists in these legacy media outlets as well, that they think this is sustainable, but it's not. It is not sustainable for us to now increasingly have multiple generations of the most inflamed possible rhetoric about their fellow citizens.
Yes.
And as people are starting to move geographically, so that their physical reality starts to mirror their Twitter reality and their digital silos, in terms of the way people tailor and self-select their echo chamber online. I think you're going to see more of that happening physically. And what I mean just practically is people that are rational will begin to leave these failing cities. That it's not, there is a limit, and it's just a matter of what does it look like when, something's got to give, finally gives, kind of what that looks like. And the thing that I have been saying is that I think there's two things that are going to increasingly drive that foot traffic. And one of them is I think people are going to be looking for like basically homeschool sanctuaries. Yeah. And the other one I think is people will start to, I think it's one of those things that will start off with them joking about it. But then it's going to be a real thought in their own minds, and they'll start to go, well, where do we want to be when things get crazy? Like when things go down, whenever, where do we want to be?
I think people are already thinking that. Right.
And so I think that that's only going to increase as communication happens, and people will say, yeah, we moved here. Here's the things we like about it. And also if something ever does happen, this is where we'd want to be. Yeah. So, but that's a whole nother topic. The point that I make, whenever you're talking about this infighting in these different groups, that's kind of what our founders warned us against in terms of faction. And it's kind of inevitable whenever you have an increasingly rigid orthodoxy within different enclaves of thought, and you kind of combine that, marry that to this idea of good and evil, heroes and villains, if you will, that everyone who isn't with me must be the enemy. You don't allow yourself to have any nuance in terms of the overlap and your ability to get along with other people. Now, I think the left is a lot better about showing up whenever it matters, if it's a clear left versus right distinction, than the right is, in terms of being cohesive in opposition. So I think, in other words, I think that the left as a monolith, even though it's not, is better at uniform opposition to the right in their own minds than the right as a monolith, which it's not, is at uniform opposition to the left. And you're going to get that whenever you have a large portion of people on the right that are like, I don't want anyone to tell me what to do, and I just want to be left alone. So you can go fight your own battles. Yeah, I get that. But it is inevitable, and that's part of, to my first point, it's unsustainable. It's unsustainable for you to have that happening where, the only way that you factor things is, okay, do you agree with all of my perspectives? Yes or no? If no, you're the enemy, or at best case scenario, someone who I'm just not interested in talking to.
Yeah. The amount of times I've seen re-education camps brought up on Twitter just in the past week, it's.
So that's just not a sustainable thing. And so that's why whenever I ask you about, what do you see the trajectory of this? There are lots of different things that I look at, and, people say it's not sustainable. And I'm like, I agree, it's not sustainable. There's lots of things that aren't sustainable. So let's say, for example, my wife and I got rip-roaring drunk every night and fought, until we passed out, and threatened each other or something like that. And we would wake up the next morning and apologize. And then we do the same thing that night. That you might be able to do that for a while, but it's not sustainable. And everyone would acknowledge it's not sustainable, but that's not the end of that story. Saying that's not sustainable isn't the end. The end is the end. The way that the thing that isn't sustainable concludes when whatever it was running on gives out, whatever's left over, in the aftermath, that's the point. So just to say something can't continue going the way it's going doesn't really do much. What you have to establish is, okay, can you get some kind of timeline or trajectory? Maybe what are some metrics you could use, in other words, make predictions that are kind of pointless. And then ask the question, okay, how much damage is going to be done before it stops doing the thing that it's doing? And
right.
So that's the question that I always ask myself with a lot of these things, whether it's the way the current model for the news media or a lot of these ideologies that are gaining ascendancy, or at least are perceived to be gaining ascendancy because they're treated as such, I agree. It doesn't work. So it's not sustainable. Question is what's the collateral damage going to be? Like, what's the bill at the end going to look like? What's it going to cost for enough people to realize that it doesn't work and for it to stop doing what it's doing? And so that's the main question whenever I ask you about that. The last point I'll make is Nassim Taleb. He calls it the turkey problem, the turkey and the butcher. He gives in, I think he first introduced it maybe in not Anti-Fragile, but the one before that, the Black Swan. He says that if you're a turkey and every single day some nice man comes and gives you food, every day that you're in that arrangement, perceiving him as being a nice guy who's taking care of you and you getting that food, you're going to get more confident that you understand your situation. You're going to get more comfortable in your situation. But the problem is that there's an asymmetry of your feelings about it and the reality of it, because every day that goes by while you're getting more confident and more comfortable in your situation is one day closer to Thanksgiving or the day before Thanksgiving.
Yep.
And the point he makes is that the day before Thanksgiving is the most confident and the most comfortable that turkey has ever been in his understanding of his situation, in his security, or at least his belief in his security of his situation, of his confidence in the nice farmer or the nice butcher or whatever. So in other words, when he is most wrong is when he is most confident in that belief. And so what Taleb talks about is you want to be the butcher, not the turkey. The butcher knows what's going on. It knows, the butcher knows Thanksgiving's coming. The turkey doesn't. And so, if you know it, then you can calibrate that in there. And my point is that the people in the news media who are doing this, who are using this, there's just a language that they've gotten used to and that they've gotten really comfortable with that they shouldn't be comfortable with. There's a method of talking about people they disagree with that they've gotten comfortable with that they shouldn't be comfortable with because of what it does to the population when people absorb it and internalize it and then operate as if that inflamed sense of things is how things actually are. And so they're like the turkey. They think, every single day, it's just fine. It was fine yesterday whenever we painted this group as hating us or this group is hating us. And if you're watching, they hate you too, right? If it's on the right, it's they want to take all your freedoms and your guns and destroy your way of life. And if it's on the left, they're a bunch of communists who want to completely, or if you're on the left, they're a bunch of right-wing racists who, want to destroy progress and kill minorities and, implement some kind of white ethno-state or something.
They want to make internment camps. Oh wait, that's us.
Yeah, exactly. And so what my point is that they're really the more comfortable they get with that rhetoric, the closer we are to Thanksgiving. The closer we are to whatever the consequences of that on either end and everywhere in between of that kind of language becoming so ubiquitous, becoming just the norm, instead of the exception. Like, it should get your attention when you hear that, and instead it's like that's just the thing. So these things lose meaning, but also they have consequences. I just don't see it as being sustainable. So back to my previous question about, kind of where you think it's going, and you described all these fractures within these groups. That is inevitable. But the question is, is what's the cost? What's it going to look like on the other side of it coming to a head? Does it go out with a bang or with a with a sputter? I don't know, but it's going to end somewhere. It's going to result in something. It's going to be bad, I think.
Yeah. So when I was making that the metaphor of the thermometer, I was thinking, should I describe it as having the top cut off and continually rising towards it, or should I just say that it's an endless thermometer? So the reason I said it's endless is because that's the way that the media is kind of perceiving it. They're willing to raise the temperature as much. And I don't think it's necessarily that the thermometer is going to break, but it's that everyone in the room is going to boil.
Yeah.
So they're willing to take the temperature as high as they possibly can. But they don't even realize when they're going to cross the point when the frog is boiled. So I guess we both have.
And that's assuming that they already
metaphors.
Haven't, right? That's assuming they already haven't.
Sure, some of them might actually want that.
Line.
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm saying that's assuming they haven't already hit that line. Like, in other words, there's all these things that it's like, I am acutely aware that all of these situations that I think accurately perceive as really bad aren't in their worst iteration yet. And so just because I don't know whatever the next phase of it is going to look like, that doesn't mean that it's not there. So I think that my point is that I think that it's not like they're going to hit a line and then everyone's just going to start shooting or something, right? They'll hit the line of when the rhetoric starts to have these tangible consequences, and they'll keep going across it. And as they go across it, those consequences will start to appear and multiply and increase in their occurrence. And then on the other side of that, eventually that will hit a tipping point, and then it'll fizzle out. Like, one thing that I was listening to interview, again, this one's Eric Weinstein, and he said, because the guy who was interviewing him said something about how he was worried about violence happening, and Eric was like, we're there, we're in there. He's like, if you were going to write a program, if you were going to code what it would look like for civil unrest and social divisions in the U.S. to manifest in regular violence that was, ideological in nature, what would that code look like? What would it appear like? Because if I was going to do it, it would look a lot like Portland. It would look a lot like Los Angeles. It would look a lot like Chicago. It would look a lot, you know what I'm saying? And so,
yeah.
Eric's point was, we're there. We've already crossed the line to where civil unrest has become normalized. And it was happening, and it's become normalized. And whatever the forces are that have been feeding it have not cut it off from that food. It's only getting more of that food, whatever it is. I'm sure it's a lot of different things. And so that's my point, is that I think there's an argument to be made that we've already hit that boiling point. It's again, whenever you start to, like, the frog is in the boiling water, it's not like it immediately dies and is cooked, right? Like, if I have a baked potato and I put it in the oven, the oven's 425 degrees. Just because I put the potato in the oven doesn't mean it's like immediately going to bake. It's going to take a while for that to happen, but more of it will bake the longer it's in that environment.
Yep.
And so I think we've already hit the point where that rhetoric is starting to have serious, tangible, observable consequences on both ends of the ideological spectrum. The question is like, how much longer until the potato is done? Like, how much longer until the frog is fully boiled? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I also think we're probably making our audience pretty hungry at this point with all these food metaphors. But
Frogs and potatoes.
hey, we might have a French audience.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, but no, I hear what you're saying. So we are in a point where there's definitely people who are already past the limit. There's already that point. Like I said, we're at a point where organizations are being formed to make lists of Trump supporters, and people are calling for re-education camps and saying, "What do you do when half of the country is completely believing a fallacy,
brainwashed?"
Just like. Okay, so we are already ideologically at that point. So the question is what follows. So there's going to be an ideological break, in my estimate. There's going to be the ideological / cultural break. Then there's the more sociological break. That's when people start to break down kind of in person. And then you have the political break, which is essentially civil war. Or it doesn't need to be a civil war. It could just be a collapse of the nation as a union.
Yeah, it's a obvious and practical disunion.
Yes.
Yeah, that will happen by virtue of it being easy and the circumstances aren't. And basically, like I envision more of a I always forget this term, but whenever people divorce, but it's like they mutually agree to it. Like they say there's irreconcilable differences.
Yeah.
Both agree. I don't ever Google it to try and figure out what the term is because I don't want Google to think that I'm thinking about getting a divorce and start spamming me with like divorce.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that would be terrible.
So that's literally the only reason why I don't Google it. But my point is that that whatever happens, whatever the conclusion is, as I see it, I think it will be it'll be a thing that most people go, yeah, that makes sense, because they'll look around and it'll accurately map onto what their observations are. And honestly, the way I see it, whenever you talk about like ideological break, you brought up the Daily Wire earlier. I'm not a big fan of what the Daily Wire is doing. I think I understand it, and it makes sense, but it's just kind of doubling down on an issue that I wrote about a couple years ago with Ben Shapiro and a lot of people on the right more broadly, is the distinction between pastors and evangelists. And that what I'm seeing on the right is all these churches cropping up and saying, hey, aren't you sick of all these things? If you agree with us, just come to our church. Come over here to our place, and you're going to get fed ideas you already agree with, which is not a way to increase your congregation size. If you follow the metaphor, all that does is centralize people that already agree with you. But if you're on the right, you should be looking around and saying, we've lost the culture war. We're losing the battle for ideas. We're losing ground on every front that you can imagine. So we need to expand. We need to start making inroads into these areas, and we need to do that by expanding our coalition of people that agree with us. And in order to do that, we need to have some mechanism that is clearly geared towards changing people's minds. And facts don't care about your feelings is not that thing. That is not an evangelistic tool. That would be the equivalent of some kind of a Christian going and doing like cold evangelism and saying, hell doesn't care about if you believe in it or not, or something, and expecting that to have some kind of really, impact on a person. That's not effective. And most people, who would be in that space would tell you, yeah, no, I wouldn't evangelize like that. That's terrible. And if you say, well, how would you do it? They say, well, you want to meet people where they're at, is usually the phrase that gets kicked around. Meet people where they're at, understand their issues, understand what's going on, and find a way to help them see that what you're offering them speaks to those issues, speaks to those things. And another thing that, at least whenever I was doing collegiate ministry, we would say is that, if you, the bridge of trust is what is required to bear the weight of truth. And the stronger, the heavier the truth, the stronger the bridge of trust there needs to be. And I think that there's exceptions to that. Like, I don't need to get into it, but I think there's exceptions to that. In other words, I don't think you have to have some really deep, intimate, personal relationship with someone in order for you to receive, truth that is like obvious once you get it or something.
Yeah.
And so there's exceptions. But my point is that I think the general idea that you have to gain trust with someone, that you have to meet them where they're at, that you have to find a way to map what you're offering and the thing you're trying to convince them of into, like, they didn't come to you looking to have their mind changed. You came to them. And so you have to adapt that for them. And so what I'm seeing right now is
the right's not tailoring their message.
Well, I don't think they are, and I don't think that they're even aware of the fact that that's a problem. I think they're saying, okay, screw it. We're going to, that's what you hear is, okay, well, the left is going to do this, and we're going to have our own this thing. We're going to have and we're going to have these two different economies, and that's already starting to happening. I mentioned that, I think, in that election live stream. And my problem with that is all that does is well, let me ask this, or at least say this, and you can tell me if you think it's wrong. What it doesn't do is incentivize people to work things out. It doesn't incentivize nuance. It doesn't incentivize agree to disagree.
Yeah.
It does the opposite. And by the way, I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing in certain circumstances. I think there are some issues that you would say, I am perfectly okay not, compromising at all on this issue with your perspective. But I think that's the exception, not the rule. I think that, what John Stuart Mill, right? He says there's a good chance that the truth is somewhere in between. You have this idea, I have this idea, we talk it out. The odds of either one of us being 100% right or 100% wrong are very, very minimal. It's quite likely the truth is somewhere in between. And so what I don't like about what I'm seeing on the right is it's just the left kind of became a monolith and has established a monoculture in a lot of ways, the left establishment. Now, what the establishment doesn't know is that they have a parasite inside that's taking over and is going to use that, all that framework to destroy everything left and right. But that's a whole other topic. Kevin and I talked about that whenever we talked about the hierarchy stuff. But my point is that I don't think the answer is for the right to say, oh, yeah, we need to get our stuff together and we're going to build our own. Like, I think maybe in some areas, sure, like entertainment, if someone's like, yeah, I don't want this crap, I just want to watch a TV show. Okay, I understand that. But there needs to be some evangelistic process. Again, I'm using that not in I'm not saying conservatism is salvation or something. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that there needs to be some clearly outlined process for actively trying to change people's minds. I think that what we found is that most times the people, this is what's really crazy, is that whenever you talk to people who are have kind of woke, what you say, woken up, gotten woke in the other direction, been red pilled or whatever, very rarely does that come from them having them being firmly, kind of entrenched in their perspective, and someone coming along and saying facts don't care about your feelings, and then forwarding them a bunch of PragerU videos, and that person going, oh, okay, yeah, I'm open to this, you just sending me links and that happening. Normally what happens is it's, I heard this thing on the news and that didn't mesh with this thing. Or I had this experience, or, think about Carlin, for example, right? She self-initiated going to that Trump rally after some of these other things happened to her. And so the point that I make, and that I've heard other people make in a variety of different ways, is that most of the people who have left the left were pushed out by the left, and just, they either are, have no tribe, like a Bridget Fennessy, or they, someone like Dave Rubin would say, default, I'm looking at the right and I'm open to that because there's all these people that have been pushed out by the left. Well, that's not like, I guess that is working in some way, but ideally you would have another group of people saying, I was pulled over to the right or pulled over to whatever these ideas are because of how appealing they were, because this person or this group or whatever took the time to get to know me and to help me understand why, you know, this policy was better than this policy, or this way of doing things was better than this way of doing things. And so I was attracted to that thing. But what we have right now is it's just people getting pushed out by the left. And my whole point is that that's fine, and it's good to have things that are ready to kind of catch those people as they get pushed out. But for there to be no apparatus that is, one, attempting to do bridge building there, and I think there's some places where that's happening, but they're not getting the attention they need, or two, to be actively trying to change the minds of people on the left in a way that's friendly, in a way that's inviting. I think it's a mistake, and it's only going to, like, if you think about trends of people moving and self-selecting geography to match Twitter, having two different economies, having two different education systems, I think is what we're going to end up with in a lot of ways. I think anything that encourages that creates a situation that I mentioned at the beginning of this, you know, tirade, whatever you would call it, which is whatever happens if we do end up in a place where, you know, it's just disunion. And whenever I said people will look around and go, yeah, that makes sense. What I see happening on the right is the building up of a lot of these things that helps create that circumstance where people look around and go, yeah, that makes sense. Because we have become so distinct in our economies and our entertainment and our education and our geography. Like, why are we trying to make it work?
Yeah, so I definitely see that issue, and the media definitely inflames it. They are the driving force of the inflammation for these issues, I would say, and considering taking all that in.
Sorry, I know it's a lot.
Oh no, it was great, but considering all the ways in which there is this possibility of disunion, to an extent, I am curious to see if the sociological impact of the people taking independent action prior to reaching that federal type of level, there is a chance for a bit of that localism you talk about coming into play, where the U.S. basically becomes balkanized into local areas of and local states that are completely one way and not really the other at all. At least in terms of the cities, that may be one of the cases of it. So I see a lot of change happening with that, and if that happens, there may end up being, because the Constitution is so tightly woven and it's so difficult for any kind of states to really break apart. I think it requires 3/4 of Congress to support a segregation or leaving the Union, something along those lines. Like somewhere between, it's more than 2/3, I think.
Yeah, it's more than 2/3. I don't know what the number is for something like that. I don't know what that would be.
Yeah, so
because it's not like something we've dealt with since the last time.
Exactly, and the problem is because they have this hero complex. I don't think any individual side would be willing to forgo the power that the federal government offers at this point, because our federal government is just that strong, and it gives their individual states the ability to, if they get in power, to make legislation that will disproportionately benefit them versus whoever the villain counterpart is. So I don't necessarily see it getting to that point where the Union would dissolve. It would be incredibly difficult to reach that point. Now, the U.S. could fall from grace, and I see that being a very likely outcome because we just have too much cultural instability, and we're not acting in step with each other, with all of our opinions going towards one view. Now, on the other hand, long term, this could lead to dissolution. Long term, it could lead to civil war, something like that, especially when you have full generations born and raised Capulets and Montague style, where our home is good, our state is good, what we believe is good, and they're wrong and evil. And there is that chance that in a generation or two, when the people who have been brainwashed age up, they start to die out, and you have these younger generations, there will be that chance for reunion in it.
So based on what you just said, how would they, like, in other words, how would the younger generation, because what you were saying there, I agree with. I was talking to my wife about this the other day, and I was saying, I go, yeah, think about this. Right now, a lot of the people that are, in these echo chambers, Jiminy Christmas, are in these echo chambers, it's curated. Like, they entered it.
Yes.
They were not in it. They were in a form of it probably, but they entered it and curated it. Imagine as these places begin to, people start to self-sort more and more. Imagine growing up in that. Imagine growing up, like at the point, fast forward 15 years from now, maybe even 10, and take a kid that grew up in, let's say, the Bay Area, and take that kid and have them have a conversation about just what's true with a kid that grew up maybe homeschooled or not homeschooled, but in a school that's a little bit more like what we know now, or is more rural, that isn't going to have a lot of the same kinds of focus and programs that the schools in the cities will.
Yeah.
So take a kid from rural Nebraska or something like that, and have them have a conversation about what's true. They're not just going to be so off in their paradigms based on some self-curated thing. It's going to be axioms from birth that they were
yes.
That they're going to be incompatible. So my question is, how is that the generation that has no common ground from square one, because they grew up in a milieu where the digital environments have been separate already, and everything is separate? How is that the group that's going to find the unity in the common ground?
So this might just be the never growing out of the teenage angst in me, but the way I see it is there's generally a counterculture in every generation, unless, like, you can do hard discipline from the time they're very little in order to indoctrinate kids, and there can be threats and methods of keeping them lockstep, but without the necessary implementation of that, and that's why I say it could either go to civil war, or it could go to this, or it could go to reunion. Because there's a chance that the counterculture that develops within these balkanized states, where they're always told to just hate this other side, there's a chance that they're just going to be like, nah, screw you, mom and dad. I'm going to go talk to them. I'm going to see what they have to say. There could be that curiosity and that kind of,
heard that. Go ahead. Sorry, I shouldn't interrupt you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's fine. But I think there is a chance. Again, this is why I'm split on this. This is why I'm not making any kind of hard call either way. But I see there being a chance that there's just going to end up being a massive backlash to it, in a way. I could see, depending on how it plays out. So there's way too many factors at play here for me to make any kind of serious long-term call. And I think this would be 30 years out even. I think 30 to 40. I think it'd be 2 generations, honestly. I could see the aspect of a counterculture developing wherein they essentially fall apart from the previous generation, and they they have that intellectual curiosity to see what those evil people are saying. They're like Eve with the apple. They have that curiosity. They want to find out why is this forbidden?
How'd that work out for Eve? So here's my point. What I think is baked into that, what's baked into that assumption you just make, because I've heard other people say this, this whenever people talk about how Gen Z is conservative or some other, completely ludicrous and afactual proposition. What's baked into that assumption is that is a binary that doesn't exist with this ideology. The binary is, okay, here's the ideology, and the counterculture to that is the other side. Whereas the way this ideology works is the counterculture, the radicals, the within it push it farther.
Yep.
So you have, if what you're saying is you have left and right, but there's actually another line over here where the counterculture is just farther to the left of it, within it. And
right.
that is observably true within this ideology. And I mean, that's a French Revolution, all the way back to the French Revolution, where you have, the people that start the revolution, by the end, they're the ones. That's how we say the young always eat the old. It's because, no, you didn't go far enough. That's where you have these people, these professors who were occupying their buildings in the 60s and doing all these protests, and they're like, yeah, I'm just like you. You got the Brett Weinsteins, and then they're the ones who are being called racist because they're not, far enough.
Yeah.
So I think that assumption is erroneous. I'm not trying to be insulting. I'm saying it assumes a binary that doesn't exist. It assumes something about this thing that doesn't exist. It assumes something about, like, Eve saw the apple. Or in whatever you're saying, they're curious about it because they can see it. Think about like this other side of the tracks thing you see in these movies, right? Like the person from this, part of town who gets caught up with someone from the wrong side of town or whatever, they see them and they're interested in it. But what they see is an accurate depiction of it. And in other words, they actually get exposed to it authentically. Whereas in this environment, people aren't authentically exposed to the opposite ideas or to countervailing positions. They're only exposed to caricatures, hyper-inflamed caricatures, actually a moral paradigm to them. And so, I just think that it assumes a lot of things that if you actually stop to think about it, aren't really part of the math in terms of what a counterculture would look like.
Yeah, that's why I say it could go either way.
Yeah.
Because
you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, because I see it as either they end up at a point where this other side is so evil they're willing to abandon the federal power in order to diffuse or even fight against them in a type of civil war or conflict of some sort, or just disunion, or there's going to be that way because they could go really either way to an extent. In some proportion, there will be people who go both ways, who go in either two directions. Totally. It's not all going to be uniform.
That's correct. I think you're right that some people will have that. The question is, what's the attrition rate in either direction, right?
Exactly.
So this position, on the left, and that position is experiencing attrition. Are people, abandoning it and going to a farther left position? If so, in what numbers? Are people abandoning it, some going to a more moderate position? If so, what are the numbers? And if it skews, 90-10 or something like that, or 85-15, then, that 15, okay, cool. But, the other 85 are going, that counterculture is just taking it into oblivion.
Yeah, so I'm seeing it at least from the left, where there could be the chance that it goes so far it becomes almost like Eastern Europe, where there ends up being almost a distaste to it from being force-fed too much. Like how Eastern Europeans are very anti-communist because of the Soviet Union and being forced into it so much that now the general air of most Eastern European countries is they want nothing to do with it. Totally. Like they're just dead set against it.
And how are the economies of those countries? My point being, we've already addressed the fact that it's unsustainable. The question is, what's it look like on the other side?
Yes.
I think the metaphor you gave is perfect because it's like, yeah, they hate it. And also they have unemployment rates of like 15%, mass levels of alcoholism, and all this other stuff. So it's like, did they escape communism? Yes. Are there countries thriving on the other end? Yeah. So that's what I'm saying is, with the U.S., yeah, I mean, I think you're right that people will, and then what happens in the other direction where you get pushed into some far right authoritarian thing as a result, I don't know. That's a lot of speculation, but I think you're right. The problem is that how much of just the natural elements of American exceptionalism get hollowed out and are emaciated on the other end of it, that we're completely unrecognizable after this thing has run its course.
Yeah, and there's going to be the question of, will either of these, assuming that there ends up becoming this kind of hard divide, is there which, I mean, there's definitely a soft divide now. So
I've heard it called, it's not a civil war, it's a cold war, and I think that's actually a really good metaphor. I like that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So the question is, after such a hard divide, would any of the factions push towards liberalism again? That's an interesting question about it. I don't think it's one that we can necessarily answer. Because
go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, because relating to your talk about hierarchies, the right tends to like hierarchies. So there's a chance that they could fall more into more authoritarian type of control for whatever they are doing.
They like certain hierarchies, right?
Yes.
Like they don't like hierarchies. That's my whole point that I made at I don't remember what I was talking to about government and how there's this idea on the right that they don't like big government. My point is they don't like big government in certain areas. And I'm not even saying it. And that might have been you I was talking to.
I think we were talking about military.
Yeah, and I'm like, I agree. I actually don't. There are some areas where I wish the government would, dissolve the Department of Education. But I'm totally cool with having a big military. I don't think we should hide from those things because those are different. Those are completely different. But to your question about embracing liberalism, there is an interesting point, and we're coming up on the 2-hour mark, so we might want to find a good stopping point here at some point. But one of the best ways I've ever heard the Civil War described, the American Civil War historically, was the person was talking about how there's this erroneous notion that X caused the Civil War. That it was like, was it slavery? Was it not slavery? Or, was it states' rights? Was it not states' rights? And they say that there's actually two questions you have to answer, and there are two motivations that you have to consider. They said the first question is, why did the South secede from the North? All right, why did they secede? Why did they break away from the North? They had their own reasons for doing that. Were those reasons slavery? Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Like it's unquestionable.
Yeah.
And so that's the first question. The second question is, why did the North not let them do that? Was that slavery? No. That got woven in later, sure, but there's a whole lot of reasons why you don't just let the bottom half of your economy and your country just become another thing.
Right.
You don't do that. And so, my point is that there's going to be multiple factors in terms of what one side does and the other, and that'll fuel what they embrace later on. But the way I see a lot of that playing out is there will be places, as people migrate, it's weird how all these, sci-fi movies have these pictures of, they kind of independently and also collectively understood that, the cities become this big thing, and then the outlying area is kind of this wasteland, and there's, these roaming caravans of tribes and these little outposts, but everything's in the city. And I think there's going to be some truth to that. But I think that as people migrate from there, you're going to get opposing, where you brought up like the balkanization in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But what I was getting at in terms of the two different questions for our previous Civil War is, I think you're going to run into the cities are going to be what is creating a lot of the legislation for these areas. And you're going to get places on the outside of it that are just going to go, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to enforce that. And so then you're going to run into the question of, will they let them? Will they say, okay, fine. And then those places say, and also we're not going to pay taxes to you. Sorry. And so then do they let them? So that's, I think, if they see whatever ideology shapes the creation of a thing into some, successfully, is going to, be what it iterates out into future derivations of. And so, like, liberalism was part of the founding ideology of the U.S. If you look at the Articles of Confederation and then the Constitution, there are through lines in terms of the ideas. The Declaration of Independence, Articles of Confederation, the Constitution, or even going back before that. So like the Mayflower Compact and other things like that. Like, the ideas that are the foundation of a place that work are usually the things that they build on, at least whenever they're thinking about what they want it to look like. So to your question about liberalism, I think if it works in whatever places are, whatever this, looks like in the future, if we do have some, crazy thing happen, if there are roots of liberalism in it, then yeah, I think then they will return to it. There's an argument that, well, I'll leave it there. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. But if the roots are something else, if it's unprincipled, which, my hope for there being that we become more moored, more constrained by principle in the future, rather than our current trajectory of being less constrained by principles in the future. I'm not optimistic for that. But if it does happen and principle is the root of something that works out and survives, then yeah, then it'll flourish ideally, or at least for a time, kind of how we have here.
Yeah. So I think we've got a good conversation about that we can have about the difference between moralisms and principles. Because as I've been looking into it, it seems like as nations continue on, they tend to devalue their principles and begin to value these moralisms about what is just and right and
I
correct.
Heard you bring that up with Kevin in your guys' conversation, and I was like, I think James is off the rails here.
Yeah, so we can have a fun
I think you're separating two different things. I think you're making a distinction, I think you're trying to make a distinction between two things that are inseparable. But anyway.
I think we can have a fun conversation about that. But relating it back to the hero-villain narratives of media, I think this is going to continue to play up and play on. Though one thing I will say is, as the media is continuously more maligned, I think there is going to be, on both sides, a bit of a turning point against the hero-villain narrative. I think there will be a backlash to it eventually. So that is where I have a modicum of hope.
Caveat.
Yes, obviously. But I mean, I try not to be super pessimistic about this type of stuff. But looking at everything, I would say, and again, bringing it back to the heroes and villains of the media, I think should these factions become hard factions and sociological changes occur from it, I think at that point you're going to have you're going to have the right, because they're so really against legacy media, I think they're the ones who currently had the hope for more liberalism being born within their hard faction, a little bit, at least. Whereas on the more left, I am less certain. I know there is a disdain for some legacy media from the left, but I don't see it nearly as fervently as on the right. And a lot of times I think they see it more as a tool than as a tool that they can use more than something that they're against. That's my perspective on it, at least.
No, I think you're right for the most part there. I mean, to me, whenever you talk about a big backlash against the media, what I don't see is anything in place telling me that they're paying a consequence for that. Like, again, I think to a degree, I said this, I think it was Carlin asked me in our interview our conversation, if I thought the media were the enemy of the people. And I said, no, I don't think so. I said, I think the people are the enemy of the people. And what's really crazy is actually I still stand by that. I don't think the media are the enemy of the people. I think the media are dishonest. I think they're doing things that are really, really dangerous and have measurable consequences, which I've spoken and written about extensively. I'm not a fan, but I think they're responding to where a lot of different things, including where we're at culturally. There's this movie. It's a really great, low budget, but you wouldn't know it from watching it. A horror movie called Session 9. I would highly recommend. And it's about these guys who are the guy who's like, they do the business where you remove asbestos from old buildings, because people used asbestos in these buildings previously, and then we found out, you
it's
die
toxic.
from breathing this stuff in. And so the guy who runs their crew puts this he really needs the money, so he bids, them getting this done in this really crazy period of time, like super short. And so they're just working nonstop, and it's at this place, I think it's called like the Danvers Psychiatric Institute, somewhere in like the Northeast United States. And it's about the different things that happen to them while they're there. And one of them finds these tapes from these sessions from one of the patients. The place had been shut down for a while. And it's this kid who had multiple personalities, and he'd like killed his family, and he had this one personality that the guy kept like waiting to get to. When he finally, kind of at the climax of the movie, I don't want to give anything away because people really should watch it. It's great. But it kind of seems like there was some kind of demonic possession or some kind of, maybe baser human instinct at play that this personality represented. And the doctor asked him, why people let him take control, or why Billy or whoever the kid was, why he allowed him to do that, or why he was able to get away with it. And the personality says, because they let me, Doc, because they let me. And, his point is that if the host didn't, desire on some level or a strong enough level to do these bad things, it wouldn't work. They wouldn't have done it. And so that, personality, again, whether it's some demon or just some, malevolent human instinct, if it wasn't strong enough, the person wouldn't do it. So my point is, with the media, they do it because we let them. They do these things. They lie. They tell us what they think we want to hear and what some people do want to hear about our ideological opponents. Even though it's really harmful, even though it's, people in our own family or neighbors or in our communities or friends, whatever, they tell us these things because we let them. Like I said, they've gotten into the habit of saying these things that they shouldn't be comfortable saying. It's just become natural for them. And so, I don't, when you were saying you had some hope that there's been a backlash against them, I'm just yet to see that backlash manifest into something that makes them, change in any way that's noticeable before, it's too late from a, social cohesion perspective. But I'm glad that you're hopeful for that, because what I see is a society that's completely unhinged from any principles or, nuance, and, are kind of living in these information silos, in some ways imposed on us, in other ways constructed and curated by us. And it's having a lot of consequences that I don't think people realize, and probably won't for a while. But it's not sustainable, that's for sure, for us to think that not I mean, two things, right? And we can wrap it up here. It's not sustainable for us to, continually entrench ourselves in a perspective that those who agree with us are evil, and that they're the villains and must be stopped, and that we're the heroes because of our ideas. Yeah, that's not sustainable. And there's this whole other level that it should be outrageous for someone to offer us that proposition, but we don't. That, to my point I just made, it's not considered outrageous. People allow that, and they incentivize being fed something that's fundamentally insane and destructive on a personal level, on an interpersonal level, on a societal level, on a community level, et cetera. It's totally destructive for that, but for some reason people don't. The minute a talking head says the other side is bad, they're like Nazis, they want to take away your rights, or they want to kill all minorities, or they're all commies or Nazis or a socialist or whatever. The minute someone tells you that, you should, question it. Well, no, you shut the TV off, you change channel, but we don't change the channel. So I'm more, to my point, why I'm not as optimistic as you are, although I'm glad you are, someone has to be, is that people don't change the channel when they're told something like that. That, I've had people actually make the case to me that the president, there's all these parallels, that he's like Adolf Hitler. And I'm like, whoever told you that, you shouldn't listen to them. Like, that should be something, like, and if someone said the same thing about like Joe Biden being Joseph Stalin, I would say, no. I just, like, we do not reject the poison that's being fed to us, and then somehow we're surprised that we're poisoned on a macro level. Yeah. So that, that is, more concerning to me. And that's why I get mad at the places that are incentivizing that on the social cultural level, because that's what we're seeing in the media is they do it because we let them. Yeah. I relate this Take us home, man. Take us home. Yeah. No, say what you're going to say. Take us home now. Okay. I was going to just relate that a bit to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There is one of the higher needs is self-actualization. And it seems like as societies age, you kind of go higher up you climb up the ladder, but then they kind of implode a little bit at the bottom, and people kind of, they're not able to reach that hierarchy, that point of having meaning anymore, and especially as life becomes easier. But everyone still wants to be a hero. Everyone has this desire to have need and purpose in their lives, and by creating these kind of hero villain narratives, they're able to give themselves that type of meaning. So I see that as being a big issue and sort of what feeds the beast. Yep. So I think our society, and by society I mean like human prosperity has evolved much faster than our previous. I think, how would I word it? We used to have rites of passage that because you, as a member of this tribe or of this township or whatever, it was assumed you were going to play a vital role in our survival. And so we spent thousands and thousands of years developing rites of passage to mark moving from childhood into adulthood because we needed adults. It became ingrained in us that we had to have something to prove ourselves, that we were of value to our tribe, that we were of value to our people.
Yep.
And that was based on an assumption about needs. It was based on an assumption about threats. And so we adapted this sense of, proving ourselves against, foes, or just proving that we, that we earned it, I guess, that we earned our place, that we, were brave, or that we were strong, or whatever. And the prosperity of society has absolutely evolved at a much faster rate than our kind of deprogramming of that, although I don't think that's a bad thing, having those rites of passage. But to where we still have this innate sense of, like you said, wanting to see ourselves as heroes, wanting to have that self-actualization. And we're so prosperous that we have way, 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 for the most part, evolved past the kind of natural ways in which we were able to prove that. And so people are just grasping at things, trying to prove that they, for guys, it's that they're a man, or for women that they're a woman, an independent or self-actualized woman, whatever. We've evolved past the ways that we did that naturally, and we still have that innate desire for that. But we don't have a place to show that. We don't have a battle. I mean, I've quoted this before, but Tyler Durden in Fight Club, identifies it, when he says our great war, or we don't have a great war. Our great war is our lives, or our Great Depression is our lives. Our great war is a spiritual war. We just don't have a natural way of doing that. So we're contriving them in a way that's really dangerous, I think. But that's a whole other thing. But you brought up Maslow's, and so I had to think about that.
Yeah, of course.
I have a theory. You want to hear my? Actually, I'm not gonna get into it. It's but yeah, go ahead.
Maybe next time. But yeah,
I'm not sure. I want to record the theory that I have. So maybe.
All right, we can have a different conversation about it then. Maybe not record it. I'll give you feedback.
But take us home on anything else you want to add. I'll leave it there. The last thing I will say is that I think it is a sign of the times, and a sign kind of the thing we were getting at, that a conversation about the way our media operates very quickly manifests into the conversation about the practical ways in which a civil war and its reconstruction will play out. So, that's telling. But this has been good. James, why don't you, say anything else add? And if not, just, tell people where they can find you and all that other stuff.
Yeah, not too much. I mean, for me, I see us at the turning point of an empire. We are where basically the U.S. can be revitalized as almost a brand new empire, go through another outburst of evolution, or it may dwindle into nothingness. That's kind of where we're at. It doesn't mean the end of the nation. It just kind of means, as far as we are as a superpower, and as far as we are as just a growing and prosperous nation, it can be coming apart. I see this as a symptom of that, and I see this as an accelerant to it. Yep. So regardless, I think there's reasons both to be hopeful and fearful. There can be a potential backlash. There can be fallout, and it's not going to be an easy time. It almost certainly will not be. But that doesn't mean that we need to let pessimism kind of take over for what happens. So if you want to follow me, you can find me at commutationconstruct.locals.com. I am also Commutation C on Twitter, and at James Derian on Minds and Gab. You can also email me at james@commutationconstruct.com. So feel free to follow and get in touch however you like. You're up, Truman.
Cool. Yeah, no, I appreciate that, man. And again, I would echo that people go and check the stuff out, as I said at the beginning. you do these things where you give speeches, famous speeches, and then you kind of dissect the famous speech, and you've gone through the Federalist, Anti-Federalist Papers. You've talked about the rise and fall of empires. You've talked about conservatism and different iterations of that. And most recently with Kevin of engineering politics, which is a really good and interesting conversation. And so, yeah, people should go check it out. Like there is, I think that your channel, whether it's on YouTube or Locals, is criminally unsubscribed and unfollowed. So what I mean is there's not enough people subscribe and not enough people follow. So people should go and do that and check it out because it's super interesting. Yeah, I feel like there was something you said at the end there about the empires that I had a thought that I wanted to add, but I think the thought was whatever it is that happens, to kind of close us out on our theme, the current media framework, whether it's the incentives or what people are asking from them, which I guess goes into the incentives, that it's going to have to change. What we see, we're looking at now for our legacy media is going to have to look differently if we want things to get better. Is my point. It's going to have to look differently in a lot of ways that I'm not optimistic about, but that's okay.
I do see some hope in the independent media that's been propping up and gaining more prominence, but yeah.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. We'll see. I don't know.
Exactly. Time will tell.
Right. Anyway, for me, if this is the kind of thing you're into, please like, share, and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter. That's at MyMundaneMind. And you can go to my locals, which is returntoreason.locals.com. YouTube Return to Reason, Spotify Return to Reason, ThinkSpot, Medium, all those other places. I publish articles, and my locals community, the people in my community have been asking questions and having really cool dialogue, so please come and join that. It's been a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. And I'm really thankful for them. And so if you're not a part of it, you need to come be a part of it because it really is pretty special. And especially with the way tech is going, it's kind of inevitable that we're going to be migrating to places not necessarily echo chambers, but where people aren't screaming in our face, just random nonsense, which is what Twitter is. So anyway, that's it. I don't think there's anything else. I'm going to stop recording unless you have anything else, James.
No, I am good.
All right. Go Chiefs. Thanks, James. We'll have to do it again.
All right.
And peace out, everyone.
Have a good one.